Did you know that the World Mission Society Church of God has filed multiple lawsuits against former members and other people who have simply offered critique or talked about their personal experience inside of the group? If you don't know this, and if you don't believe it, I'm going to give evidence. I'm going to put a link in the description below to a website that will give you access to the court records from these different cases, where you can personally go and you can see for yourself that I'm not making this up. So that's what this video is going to be about. This video, I guess it just has two purposes. I want to first just give you this information. I think, again, you as a member, if you're watching this as a member, you deserve to know this. You deserve to know that your church, your organization that you belong to, has the characteristics of a group that can't stomach people critiquing it. And I think it's worth asking, why is that? If a church has the truth, why would it be bothered by critics, by persecutors? Wasn't the early Christian church defined by persecution, by people slandering and lying about them and attacking them and ultimately killing them? Do we have historical records of the early church responding to their persecutors by fighting back, by attacking back, by insulting back when they were insulted? No, that you don't see that in the early church. Why don't you see that? Why don't you see the early church fighting back against their persecutors? Now, you do see them fighting back against doctrinal things. You see them fighting back against false doctrines. But what I'm saying here is you don't see things that are in line with filing lawsuits or legal attacks against their opponents. The reason you don't see that in the early church is because they were following the commands, the teachings of Jesus. Jesus gave very clear, specific examples, very clear, specific teachings, that is, about how Christians should respond when attacked, when insulted, when persecuted. So first, it's just that point that I want to make is that you deserve to know, and I hope that you will go and look into this and realize that this organization you belong to is one that practices things, that has behaviors that I think are very evidently, demonstrably not in line with the teachings of Jesus. And that kind of gets to my second point. The second thing I want to talk about here is that this church and its members very often boast and claim very dogmatically, very confidently that they are the only church who keeps the commands of God, that they're the only church who is truly obedient to the teachings of Jesus and to the teachings of the Bible. But then you have stuff like this. You have things like this that this church does. And I'm going to show you how, I keep mentioning that Jesus gave very clear, specific examples that the WMSCOG is obviously not obeying. And so that's what I'm just going to show you a couple places that makes it very clear that what the WMSCOG is doing when they file lawsuits against former members or against any of their critics, they are demonstrably, undeniably, irrefutably just blatantly ignoring Jesus's commands. They're just basically saying they're either ignorant that Jesus has commands concerning these things, that the New Testament has very clear directions and prescriptions about how we as followers of Christ should respond to our enemies, to our critics. They're either ignorant that those teachings are in the New Testament, or they're aware of those teachings and they're just ignoring them. So the first place, Matthew 5, verse 43. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have?" World Mission Society Church of God, if you only love those who love you, what reward do you have? Are you listening to this? Do you hear these clear things that Jesus said? Is this new to you? Because it seems like it is. It seems like it must be. You must not be aware of these things that Jesus taught, or are you just directly disobeying them? He says, do not even tax collectors do the same. If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. So a couple things here. He says, relating to your enemies, how do you respond to somebody, an enemy who comes and attacks you or persecutes you? Keep in mind, when former members will come out and speak against the church, when they will critique the church, when people like myself will make videos, again, critiquing the church or looking at their doctrines and explaining why I think their doctrines are incorrect, things like that. Again, just simply offering critique of the organization, either its doctrines or its behaviors. When people like myself or former members do that, the WMSCOG labels this as slander or as persecution. So let's just think about that word right now, persecution. If the World Mission Society Church of God is correct, that what we are doing is persecuting them. Now, I don't think that's true. I think that the biblical definition of persecution does not fit what's happening when people offer critique of the WMSCOG. I think there's a big difference. Now, if we were dragging members out of the church, putting them in dark rooms, and then trying to threaten or force them to leave the group or else suffer the consequences sort of thing, well, that would be persecution. But for somebody like myself to take their scriptures or take their doctrines and then look at the scriptures and say, hey, I don't think their doctrines line up with the scriptures, that's not persecution, okay? If it is persecution, well, the WMSCOG does the same thing. How often in the WMSCOG teachings do they analyze like the Catholic Church and other denominations and then take scriptures and say, here, these scriptures are why the Catholic Church is Satan or evil. Well, if what I'm doing is persecuting the WMSCOG, well, they're persecuting the Catholic Church. So we're all on level playing field here. But if they are right, if what I am doing, what former members are doing, is persecuting the church, well, Jesus, again, gave very clear directions about what Christians, what his followers are to do in response to persecution. Okay, I'm going to read this one more time. And let me ask you this. As you're reading this verse, think about how has the WMSCOG responded to its critics, to its persecutors. They filed lawsuits. People have offered critique, or if you want to call it, attacked the WMSCOG. And what has the WMSCOG done? They've attacked back. Okay, listen to this again. I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. First thing Jesus says to do to your enemies, to those who persecute you. Pray for them. Pray for them. Don't sue them. Don't attack them. Don't insult them. Don't try to smother them and destroy their lives, as the WMSCOG has done with individuals like Michelle Colon, who's been involved in legal battles for years with the WMSCOG. They went after her, trying to silence her, and they were willing to destroy Michelle's life. For ultimately, if you look into that case, you'll see that ultimately their complaint against her at the foundation of it had to do with money. They were upset and they wanted to get Michelle back because they claimed that she caused them to lose financial revenue. I mean that's a whole other video in itself. All the problems surrounding that. That displays this organization has a love for money that trumps their devotion to following commands of Jesus like this one, or even trumps their love for their enemies, which is, that's what Jesus is telling us to do here, is love your enemies. Well, the WMSCOG is obviously more concerned with money than they are about loving their enemies, as Jesus commanded. So Jesus says, pray for those who persecute you. Well, again, this example of Michelle Colon. If Michelle, what she was doing was persecuting the church, again, I don't think she was. I don't think that fits the correct definition of persecution. But if the WMSCOG was if they're right about that, Michelle was persecuting them, well, what was the WMSCOG supposed to do? How should they have responded to Michelle? According to the Bible, according to Jesus. Well, first, they should have prayed for her. They should have just prayed for her. Before that, he said, love your enemies. So the WMSCOG should have loved her. Okay, so if you're not convinced yet that the World Mission Society Church of God suing former members, suing its critics, that is not following the commands of Jesus, if you're not convinced of that yet, here's another place that might convince you. 1 Peter chapter 2, where Peter says, this is a gracious thing in verse 19. He says, this is a gracious thing. When mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. So what if you're a Christian and you're suffering due to something that is unjust, something that's not fair, something that it's not right, like you didn't do anything to deserve what's being done to you? Peter's saying, endure it. And he says, for what credit is it if when you sin, you are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ suffered also for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. Okay, so Christ gave an example of what we should do, of what steps to take in situations where people might be doing unjust things to us for the sake of the argument. Say, like, I myself am in the wrong. Say, everything I'm saying on my channel is wrong. The WMSCOG is right. Ultimately, I'm just persecuting them. What I'm doing is unjust. It's unfair. It's not right. Well, Jesus gave an example of the steps that we should follow in that exact situation. And here's what it is. Says again, he left an example so that we might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. So Jesus, who did nothing wrong, yet he suffered for it. He was reviled. Okay. So what if, for the sake of the argument, what if all I'm doing to the WMSCOG, what if all these former members were doing, what if they were actually in the wrong? They were persecuting the church. They were reviling the church. What were they supposed to do according to this? Well, don't threaten. It says Jesus did not threaten. He didn't respond to threats with threats. Well, if the WMSCOG responds to members with lawsuits, that's a threat. There's a threat of, hey, I'm going to go after you now, and if you don't stop doing what you're doing, you're going to suffer. You're going to lose this case. You're going to suffer severe consequences. Jesus didn't do that. It says, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. So the WMSCOG obviously isn't obeying that. They're not following in the steps of Jesus. They're not responding to threats with blessing. So here again in 1 Peter 3, he goes on to say, if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ as Lord, the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. WMSCOG members coming to the YouTube comments who feel as if myself and the former members are persecuting you. Well, in a sense, all we're doing is we're asking you to make a defense of why you believe what you believe. We're critiquing your beliefs. Well, again, the biblical command, you guys boast about being the only church who keeps the command of God. Well, here's a command. Here's a clear command. How are you as members supposed to respond to people like myself when I make videos where in a sense I'm asking, hey, I disagree with what you believe. I think what you're teaching is not only wrong, I think it's dangerous, I think it's damaging, I think it's harming people, families, and relationships. Give an answer for it. Like, can you back up what you believe? So again, Peter says, always you should be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. So first, let me ask, is it gentle and respectful to come into the comments and threaten that, people like myself are just simply on our way to hell, that we are Pharisees, that we're demons, that we're evil, and that, we'll see who's right come judgment day? That's the sort of stuff that we hear from members. Well, no, that's not gentle, that's not respectful. Is it gentle and respectful to respond to your critics by filing lawsuits against them? Is that the gentle and respectful way to respond to people who might be opposing? Well, no, it's not. So he goes on, he says, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, oh, there it is, slandered. They love that word. The WMSCOG they love this word. They use it all the time. Slander. What I'm doing right now, I'm slandering the church. I'm not slandering. I'm offering an honest critique. I'm explaining what I see in this church's teachings and behaviors, specifically in this video, obviously, the lawsuits, and I'm offering my opinion about that. I'm saying, hey, this is what they do. This is why I think it doesn't line up with the Bible. I'm not slandering them. I'm critiquing them. But if I was slandering them, well, let's see, how should the World Mission Society Church of God respond? When you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. I don't see this. I don't see the World Mission Society Church of God doing this. And I'm not, right now, my goal right now in saying all this and talking about the church and the lawsuits and talking right now about the members in the comments, I'm not trying to just dog the members or I'm not offering insults against them. I'm not trying to make fun or anything, but this is just obvious, isn't it? I mean, and this is just one of the things that truly is mind-boggling to me. It's perplexing to me because, again, you have this group that claims to be the one true Church of God, and they will say these, what I consider to be just ridiculous claims, make these ridiculous assertions that they are the only church that obeys the commands. But just look at all these clear teachings in the New Testament about how followers of Christ are supposed to respond to enemies, to those who attack us as followers of Christ. Even if that attack is unjust, unfair, not right. There's clear directions being given here by Jesus and by Peter about how we're to respond. And it's just so blatantly obvious to me that the WMSCOG doesn't obey any of this. So again, this is saying that how Christians should respond, how Christians should be such people that they have such good behavior that when they are slandered, when they're attacked, when they're reviled, that the outside world can look at them and look at how they're acting, look at how they're responding to their accusers and their persecutors and say, man, there's something different about these guys. Like these people, they don't respond like the rest of the world does. When the rest of the world is attacked, when they're slandered, when they're persecuted, I look around, I see the world just responds in kind, right? If you're attacked, well, what does the world say to do? Well, attack back. If you're treated unfairly, well, you do everything you can to get justice. You fight back. You make them pay for it. That's the attitude of the world. Christians are supposed to be such a people that when they're attacked, when they're reviled, the outside world can look in and see how they respond to that and say, again, man, there's something different about these people. They don't respond like the rest of the world does. They don't respond like other people do. They respond with love. If we're supposed to, as Peter says, follow the footsteps of Jesus, who did absolutely nothing wrong and is being accused, having his name just thrown in the mud, being accused of all sorts of stuff, all sorts of things that ultimately were lies, were not true. What did Jesus do? Well, like Isaiah, I think it's 53 says, like a sheep being led to the slaughter, he was silent. He remained silent. He didn't fight back. If Jesus is God, well, he could have done a lot more than just punch back. He could have done a Thanos snap of the finger, and they all just dissolved. If Jesus is God, he had the power to do that. Did he do that? No, he did not. What would think about this. Look at the example of look at the evidence that the WMSCOG has given us in terms of how would they respond. Let's look at the evidence that we have before us of if the WMSCOG was put in that situation, that same situation that Jesus was, where they're, maybe not even just physically being struck in the face, but metaphorically. Let's say they're, again, what I'm doing now is striking them in the face. Again, metaphorically, or what Michelle Cologne did was her striking them in the face with saying these lies about the church, which again, they're not lies. They were true, the things Michelle was saying. But again, the sake of the argument, if the WMSCOG was being wronged, being insulted unjustly, being accused of false things, being struck in the face as Jesus was, the evidence we have makes it quite clear. I think it's demonstrable that how the WMSCOG, not only how they would respond, but how they have responded is by, well, they put up their fists and they punch back, right? They if they're insulted, well, they're going to call names back. If they're attacked, they attack back. That's the evidence we have here, folks. That's the evidence we have. That's the evidence we have to go off of. We have case after case, not only these legal battles that, again, you can look at yourself. You can look at these. You can look at the court records. But go look at the records of my YouTube comments. I mean, seriously, just go pick out a couple videos that that I've made on the World Mission Society Church of God lately, and look at how the vast majority of WMSCOG members respond to people like myself. It's certainly not with gentleness and respect. Now, I will grant that there are members from time to time who do respond in a more respectful and intelligent way. But the vast majority, I would say 99% of the members who come onto this channel and comment, which side note, they're being disobedient to their church when they come on the internet and do that anyways, because the internet is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They're not supposed to be doing this. So there's a whole question of why are they disobeying the church. I'm glad they do. I'm glad they are. But there's a little bit of inconsistency there. But go and look at these comments and see, I think you're going to see that the way they respond to people like myself, to their enemies, to their critics, is not with gentleness and respect. They not only don't respond with gentleness and respect, but I think very often they're the ones who throw the first punch, because I would say we try as best as we can to honestly be respectful in the videos, to not just, call names or say, oh, the WMSCOG, they're just all so stupid and they're idiots for believing this stuff. We don't do that. I don't hate these people. I don't want to harm these people. I genuinely don't. I want to help them. And I think very often you'll see that members come into the comments with guns blazing. They just come out firing with insults, with attacks, with again, the consistent thing is, statements about how we're Satan. That's a popular one. Sometimes even just pretty rude insults that are they just get personal, which I mostly just find to be funny. But it's not with gentleness and respect. They don't, when they're slandered and when they are reviled, they don't have good behavior in Christ that put us to shame. It's not there. They have bad behavior. They have childish behavior. They have immature behavior that I think displays that they're either not aware, the WMSCOG leadership and members are either not aware of these clear commands in the New Testament, or they just don't care. They just don't care. I think it's maybe a bit of a combination of both, but I think mostly is they don't care. Verses like this that I've talked about in this video, these sort of verses don't help their agenda. They don't do really anything to serve their what they want to accomplish. I think ultimately what this shows is that at the core of this group, at the heart of the World Mission Society Church of God, is a severely insecure organization. Okay, and you can see this. You can see this in individuals who deep down are very insecure. They even maybe on the outside they may look confident and strong and all that, but you can see when a person is critiqued, when they are called out for different things, when people might offer criticism about things that they think are not good about practices that they're walking in, or aspects of their behaviors and characters. You can see an insecure person, their insecurity is revealed by how they respond to those things. If, like the World Mission Society Church of God, you respond by doing everything in your power to shut down this criticism, that you go out of your way to do everything you can to make sure nobody's talking bad about you, nobody's saying bad things about you, and you have to, you go on this like energetic spree of trying to control everything. You're trying to control. This gets into the some of the motivation, I think, behind the information control. Insecure people or organizations, they cannot stand not being in control of the information that's out there and available for people about them. This organization, the WMSCOG, practices information control, which is obviously a characteristic of a high-demand, high-control cult group. They control and filter what members hear, what information they get, not only out of the internet, but the Bible itself. They have very strictly laid out paths with their truth books and sermon books, where they don't really want the members to go outside of these preset paths of teachings and doctrines that they've laid out for the members. And all that is just an aspect of information control. That's why members are told not to go to the internet, because they don't want members to discover different facts about the organization, how it started, facts about Ahnsahnghong, his false prophecies, his marriages, that becomes problematic when you then think of the idea of him being married to Zhang Gil Jah, but yeah, he was still married to this other woman. And there's just all sorts of strange things, troubling things that will very quickly just completely tear apart the foundation of the WMSCOG. These things are on the internet, and that's why the WMSCOG has to control the information that is out there and available, and ultimately that's why they use fear tactics to keep members from going to the internet. And that is why ultimately they file these lawsuits against Michelle Cologne, because they cannot stand not being in control of the information. Insecure organizations and people have to be in control. The truth should not be troubled by criticism, because the truth and those who are in the truth, who are standing on the truth, should have a inward sense of peace and confidence that when the criticism comes, they're not troubled by it. And this brings me to a common verse that the World Mission Society Church of God uses. The Church of God will commonly use a verse. I can't remember off the top of my head where it is. It's an Acts somewhere where basically it said that, if this group is if the Christians are false, if what they're doing is false, then it won't stand. But if it is of God, nobody can stop it. I know I'm not saying that word for word, but that's a loose paraphrase, and I'm sure you know what verse I'm talking about. This is something that the WMSCOG will often say. And again, if you go to my YouTube comments on videos, you're most likely going to run across a member who will just simply quote this verse. So in response to me critiquing the church, they'll just quote and say, again, that verse that gives the idea of, hey, say all you want. We're the truth, and in the end, we're gonna be fine, and we're going to withstand all attacks. And so when you file lawsuits, though, against your critics, when you attack and insult your critics, there's a huge contradiction there. Because on the one hand, you're saying, say all you want, just go ahead and say whatever you want, because I know we're the truth. And the truth will, the Acts verse, the truth is going to stand. The truth is going to endure all attacks. And in the end, it'll be shown that you can't fight against God. You can't fight against him. You can't fight against the truth. The truth will prevail, sort of idea. So they're saying that on the one hand, the WMSCOG is, and the members are. But then at the same time, then they'll fight back. They'll attack. They'll act as if they're actually not certain if the truth is going to stand. When the World Mission Society Church of God responds to its attackers by filing lawsuits against them, again, what they're showing is that they have this deep insecurity that they're not sure that their organization can withstand attack, which ultimately tells me they're not sure that they've got the truth. They're not sure that they're really the truth after all. If they were truly confident that they were the truth, well, why wouldn't they just follow that Acts verse? the truth with God can't be fought against. And so the truth is going to stand. Rather than that, they take this other side of, I don't know if we can withstand these critics. I don't know if our organization can survive these former members speaking out against us. So we got to sue them. We have to fight back. When they do that, they're showing that they don't really believe this. They don't really believe that, that the truth of God, you can't fight against God. And if this is true, anybody fighting against it will find that they're ultimately fighting against God. Well, they don't believe that. They're not confident in that. Because if they were, they would let the critics say what they will. They will let the persecutors persecute. And they would respond as Jesus did. They would be struck in the face, and as a sheep being led to the slaughter, they would be silent. It's 1 Peter 2. They would continue entrusting themselves to him who judges justly. So rather than taking it into our own hands when we're suffering persecution or being attacked, the teaching of Peter, the teaching of Jesus, is the footsteps of Jesus that we're meant to follow, is that rather than fighting back, we simply leave it to God. We leave it to God to bring ultimate justice or to do what he wants to these people. And that's what Jesus did by allowing himself to the point of being nailed to the cross. So if the WMSCOG was confident, that's what they would do. But I think they show their deep, deep insecurity by the fact that, they fight back. When they're struck in the face, they strike back. When they're insulted, they insult back. When they're slandered, they slander back. And they do not continue to entrust themselves to God, but they trust themselves. They take it into their own hands to get justice for themselves. And in so doing, they clearly show that they are not a church who is the one church keeping the commands of God, because it can be shown over and over again in examples like this that very clear commands of the New Testament they ignore, they don't care about, they don't listen to. A possible World Mission Society Church of God response to this. This is one I've heard recently, even in a comment. They'll say, if somebody is insulting your mom or your family, are you just going to stand there and take it? Of course not. You're going to fight back, and you're going to make sure they stop saying those bad things about your mom or your family. So this is a response from World Mission Society Church of God members, and I think leaders have probably used this response as well. So basically, I'm saying, hey, look, Jesus said, love your enemies. And they're saying, well, what if somebody insulted your mom, would you just take it? Now, what this comes down to is ultimately, you can see if you're paying attention to what's happening there, they are, again, what they're doing is showing that they don't care at that point what the Bible says. Is this idea that it might sound good, that might sound convincing on the surface that, hey, well, if your mom's being insulted, isn't it your job to go and make sure it stops? That might sound good, but the ultimate question is not whether that sounds good or not, or whether or not that might feel like the best thing to do in that situation. The question to ask is, again, as an organization that claims to be the one church obeying the commands of God, is, well, what does the Bible say about this scenario? And based on the verses we see, I don't see any evidence that what Jesus taught, what the New Testament teaches, is that, hey, if you're insulted, or if your mom's insulted, or if your dad's insulted, take it upon yourself to get them back and to make sure you shut their mouths. Shut the mouths of those who are insulting you. So the last thing is 1 Corinthians 6, where again, Paul specifically deals with lawsuits, because that's the main thing I'm wanting to talk about here is the lawsuits. And I just think that in itself, the fact that you can literally go research this yourself and see that the WMSCOG responds to its attackers with filing lawsuits by trying to basically, in part, destroy the lives of those who speak out against them, to silence them. This is very clearly not the correct behavior that a church should be walking in, that is truly following God. So 1 Corinthians 6, this is where Paul specifically deals with lawsuits in the church. I'm just going to read this and just make a few comments on some of the things he says to wrap this up. Okay, so 1 Corinthians 6, I'm just going to jump down to verse 4. You can come back and read this whole thing if you want. Obviously, he's dealing here with lawsuits that were going on between Christians. Christians were suing Christians. And so he's dealing with that, which is a little bit different than this scenario, because here you have, in this example would be supposed Christians, the WMSCOG, who's filing lawsuits against supposed persecutors. But even though it's a bit of a different scenario, I think that the teaching here still has application. There's still definitely application to these situations of the World Mission Society lawsuits. So he says, can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers, but brother goes to law against brother, and that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. So this sticks out to me. So he's saying, this is many of the cases of the lawsuits of the WMSCOG is, the WMSCOG filing lawsuits against people who were brothers or sisters. These were their fellow members that they're now filing lawsuits against because they have issues with what these members are doing. Well, Paul says, if you have lawsuits with one another, it's already a defeat for you. Paul is pretty much saying, hey, if there's lawsuits involved where you're having issues with your brothers or sisters, which is, I would say, is the exact case pretty much of the World Mission Society Church of God, even again, going back to the specific example of Michelle Cologne, well, she was a sister, and the WMSCOG started to have issues with things she was doing, so they filed lawsuits against her. Paul says to do that is a defeat for you. You are showing that you are completely defeated. You are completely failing in your mission to be a light to the world, to be a child of God, to display the love and compassion of God to the world. You have completely been defeated in that when you respond to each other with lawsuits. When you respond to attack with attack. So he says, why not rather suffer wrong? Well, why would Paul be trying to encourage these Christians instead of responding to, if you're wrong, Paul's saying, respond to that with just bear with it. This, I don't think necessarily means, if there's no time for self-defense. I don't think that's what that means. But I think that as a rule of thumb, love, compassion, kindness should be our response. And I think definitely in the situation with the WMSCOG, when people are simply offering critique, as Michelle Cologne did, the WMSCOG's directive here is why not just suffer that wrong? If you have the truth, you can take it. The thing to do is not to try to destroy this woman who is simply sharing her personal experiences and offering her sincere concerns about this group and trying to help others have information about what this organization does before they join it. That's what Michelle was doing. And you'll be able to hear from Michelle because her interview video is coming out, will be coming out soon. I'm still working on that. But why not rather suffer wrong, World Mission Society Church of God? When people like myself or others critique your church, why not suffer the wrong? If you have the truth, well, as you say, the truth of God can't be fought against, right? Because in the end, it's going to prevail. Why not rather be defrauded? Okay, the WMSCOG went after Michelle in large part because they claimed financial revenue was lost. Yeah, and again, this is something you can go and look at. We're going to be posting even full audio clips from the court recordings that we'll be releasing. So you can just listen for yourself. You can hear the interactions going on between the WMSCOG lawyers and Michelle's side. And there's some very revealing things said there, pretty much putting on full display how concerned the WMSCOG is with money. They're not okay with losing even $1. The WMSCOG side will make statements like that shows that they were willing to destroy Michelle Cologne's life. If even she had caused $1 of damages to them, that they're willing to go after her and cause her all this trouble. Well, Paul says, why not suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? And he says, on the contrary, you yourselves do wrong and defraud. So instead of the WMSCOG responding with love, with praying for their enemies, they defraud and they attack back. They do wrong against those who do wrong against them. And he says, and this to your brothers and sisters. You do this to your brothers and sisters, Paul is saying. Like the worst of all, it's as if he's saying, it's not only that you're doing wrong, it's not only that you're attacking back, but you're attacking your brothers and sisters. Isn't that exactly what the World Mission Society Church of God is doing here? I mean, this is just mind-numbing. And it's why when members come into the comments and say things like, we're keeping the commands of God. We don't, worship on Sunday. We don't celebrate Christmas. While all the while, they're belonging to this organization that is suing and attacking former members in complete disobedience to these very clear teachings of the Bible. So, hope this was helpful. If you're a current member and listen to this, I would challenge you, if you do nothing else at all, just go use the link in this video and look into these court cases that I'm talking about and see for yourself how the WMSCOG has responded to former members, and ask yourself, is this right? Is this okay? Is this how the Church of God, who is called to be, follow the example of Christ, his love? You guys even emphasize mother's love, her great love that she has for her children and the world. Well, in these scenarios, what mother's love looked like is that mother went after her daughter, Michelle Cologne, and allowed her church to potentially, destroy her life. Now, again, Michelle's life wasn't destroyed because she's strong and she just, she fought back. And so you might say, oh, well, there's a contradiction. Michelle fought back. Well, I'm not claiming, and Michelle isn't claiming to be trying to be the example of the Bible. I know Michelle has different views about those things, and that's fine. Michelle isn't doing what the WMSCOG is doing. She's not saying, hey, I am fully following the commands of God, and I'm the example of what it looks like to be obedient to the Bible. But for a church, an organization like the World Mission Society Church of God, claiming to be the one church following the commands of God, but then you look at these commands in the scriptures and you see, wait a minute, no, they're not. They're not following these things at all. They're maybe nitpicking things here and there that they decide, oh, these are the important things, and they ignore the rest, the things that don't fit their agenda or their narrative, the things like this, like love your enemies, pray for them. They have no concern for these things. So this is not the behavior of the one true Church of God. And if you're a former member or a current member, I hope you'll look into these things. So with all that said, guys, thanks for listening. Thank you to all of you who support the channel. There's people who have jumped on even recently to support the channel. Thank you for that. That definitely helps to continue making these videos. I've got a lot more on the way. And would you do me a favor, leave a like on the video, comment, and if you aren't subscribed yet, would you subscribe? All those things just help to get the content, get the channel out to more people, helps the channel to grow, and that helps me to keep making these videos. One more thing, if you listen to the podcast, would you do me a favor and leave a 5-star review if you enjoyed the podcast? I'm putting the former member interviews on the podcast and things like that, and I think the podcast platform would just be, I think it has potential to reach more people who have not heard this content before, and members who need help, and former members who need help deprogramming and things like that. So leaving a 5-star review on the podcast is just a great way to help push it out again to more people. So if you would do those things, just a few ways that you can help me out, help the channel out. So yeah, with that said, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.